If 8 months pregnant, you discovered your millionaire husband was secretly marrying another woman while still married to you for Margaret Anderson. It started with a red dress, a rainy morning in Manhattan, and a plan to crash a wedding. But what she uncovered wasn't just infidelity, it was a tangled web of lies, offshore accounts, a pregnancy scandal, and a murder plot with her name on it. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you'll hear how one woman went from betrayed wife to the heroine of the most jaw-dropping wedding crash you've ever heard of. If you love true-life twists and stories where the villain never sees it coming, hit that like button. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with a friend who loves drama, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next unbelievable story. Margaret Anderson, you cannot be serious about wearing that dress to crash your millionaire ex-husband's wedding. Sarah Williams practically shouted across their corner table at the Manhattan Cafe. Rain pelted the windows while Margaret stirred her decaf latte with deliberate calm. The coffee shop buzzed with morning conversations, the espresso machine hissing in the background like an angry snake. At 52, Margaret had learned that the most important decisions in life often came wrapped in chaos. "The baby's been kicking all morning," Margaret said, placing a hand on her 8 months pregnant belly. "She knows today is important." Sarah leaned forward, her Boston accent thickening with concern. "Honey, you're 8 months along. This stress can't be good for the baby. Richard's wedding to that personal trainer can happen without you making a scene." Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Richard thinks I signed those divorce papers 6 months ago. He has no idea his pregnant wife knows about his wedding to Jessica today." The coffee grinder whirred loudly, giving Margaret a moment to collect her thoughts. 20 years of marriage, she thought. 20 years of supporting his dreams, sacrificing her medical career, playing the perfect corporate wife. And this was how it ended, with him marrying his 28-year-old personal trainer while still legally married to her. "How did you even find out about the wedding?" Sarah asked, lowering her voice as a couple sat at the neighboring table. Margaret took a sip of her latte before answering. 3 weeks ago, I was at home when Richard's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He'd forgotten it when he rushed out for another emergency business meeting. She made air quotes around the last three words. The text preview showed everything. Jessica writing about their wedding venue, the rainbow room, the guest list of 200 people. How excited she was to finally be Mrs. Chen. Sarah's jaw dropped. "That narcissistic piece of..." "Sarah," Margaret interrupted gently. "I've had 6 months to process this. The anger phase has passed. So what's this about?" "Then revenge." Margaret stood slowly, her hand supporting her lower back. "No, it's about truth. Richard needs to know about this baby, and about the DNA test results I received yesterday." Sarah's eyes widened. "DNA test, Margaret? What aren't you telling me?" "This child might not be his," Margaret said quietly, pulling on her coat of elegant black wool that still fit despite her pregnancy. "But neither is the one Jessica's carrying." The bell above the cafe door chimed as new customers entered, bringing in the smell of rain and autumn leaves. Sarah grabbed her purse and followed Margaret toward the exit. "Wait, honey, slow down. Jessica's pregnant too." Margaret paused at the door, turning to face her best friend of 15 years. 4 months along, according to my private investigator. But here's the interesting part. The timeline doesn't match up with when she claims she and Richard got together. They stepped out into the October rain, and Sarah immediately opened her umbrella, holding it over both of them. The streets of Manhattan were already crowded despite the weather. Yellow cabs splashing through puddles, pedestrians hurrying past with their morning coffee. "You hired a private investigator?" Sarah asked as they walked toward Margaret's car. "Best money I ever spent. $10,000 from the joint account Richard forgot to close." Margaret's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "He's been transferring $50,000 monthly to an account in the Caymans. He's been planning this escape for years." "Sarah, the business trips, the late nights at the office, the sudden interest in CrossFit, all of it was preparation for leaving me." They reached Margaret's silver Mercedes, a car Richard had bought her for their 15th anniversary, back when he still pretended to care, she thought bitterly. "The ceremony starts in 3 hours," Margaret said, clicking the key fob. "I need to go home and change first." "Into what? Please tell me you're not serious about that red dress." Margaret smiled, this time with genuine warmth. The same red dress I wore to our wedding reception 20 years ago. I had it altered last week to fit the baby bump. Sarah shook her head but climbed into the passenger seat. This is insane. You're about to walk into a room full of New York's elite and announce that your millionaire husband is a bigamist. Ex-husband. Once he actually files those papers? Margaret corrected, starting the engine. And yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. But there's more to this story. Sarah, so much more. As they drove through the rain-soaked streets, Margaret's phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. The caller ID showed David Steinberg, her lawyer. Margaret, I've been trying to reach you all morning. David's formal voice filled the car. I've discovered something crucial about Richard's prenuptial agreement with Jessica. I'm on speaker with Sarah, Margaret warned. That's fine. You both need to hear this. The agreement has a clause about pregnancy and inheritance. If Jessica is pregnant at the time of marriage, she inherits everything if Richard dies within the first 5 years of marriage. Sarah gasped. That's basically a murder incentive. My thoughts exactly, David continued. Margaret, I did some digging into Jessica Monroe's past. This isn't her first marriage to a wealthy older man. Both previous husbands died under mysterious circumstances. Margaret's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Define mysterious. The first one, tech entrepreneur Thomas Blake, died in a sailing accident 2 years after their wedding. He was an experienced sailor, perfect weather conditions, but somehow fell overboard and drowned. The second, real estate mogul William Foster, fell from his penthouse balcony 3 years into their marriage. Both times, Jessica inherited millions. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. She's a black widow. A literal black widow. Margaret pulled into her driveway, the large colonial house looking strange and empty, without Richard's BMW in its usual spot. He'd been staying at his apartment in the city for the past 6 months, claiming he needed space to think about their marriage. David, meet us at the Rainbow Room at noon, Margaret said. Bring the divorce papers that were never filed and any documentation you have about Jessica's past. Margaret, are you sure about this? It could get dangerous. She turned off the engine and looked at her swollen belly. A woman discovers her true strength when she's protecting her child. And after 20 years of being diminished by Richard's narcissistic abuse, I've finally found mine. We'll be there, David said. Eleanor Anderson called me this morning. By the way, Richard's mother knows about the wedding, and she's not happy. Eleanor knows. She's known about Jessica for months. She's planning to attend the wedding too, but not as a supportive mother. She said, and I quote, "My son is a fool, but he's still my son, and I won't let some gold digger kill him for his money." After ending the call, Margaret and Sarah sat in the driveway for a moment, rain pattering on the windshield. This is really happening, Sarah said softly. You're really going to do this, Margaret nodded. You know what the strangest part is? 6 months ago, when I first discovered the affair, I wanted to die. I thought my life was over at 52. Pregnant, betrayed, discarded for a younger woman. It was every middle-aged woman's nightmare. But now I realize this is my midlife transformation. Not the one I planned, but maybe the one I needed. Richard's betrayal freed me from a cage I didn't even know I was in. They got out of the car and hurried through the rain to the front door. Inside, the house felt like a museum of a marriage that had died long before Richard met Jessica. Wedding photos lined the hallway, showing a younger Margaret, radiant in her red dress, standing beside Richard in his tuxedo. She'd been 32 then, fresh from her residency, ready to conquer the world as a surgeon. He'd been 35, a startup founder with big dreams and bigger promises. I gave up my medical career for him, Margaret said, touching one of the photos. Delivered hundreds of babies as an OB-GYN, then stopped to support his company, raise the family we never had, host his business dinners, be his perfect corporate wife. The family you never had, Sarah repeated softly. Margaret, whose baby is this, if not Richard's? Margaret walked into her bedroom and opened the closet, pulling out the red dress. Remember the medical conference in Miami 9 months ago? The one Richard was supposed to attend with me, but canceled at the last minute for a business emergency. The one where you presented your research paper on geriatric pregnancy risks? That's the one. Margaret held the dress up to herself, looking in the mirror. I met someone there, Dr. James Fletcher, a toxicologist from Oxford, British accent, kind eyes. Actually listened when I talked about my research. We had dinner, shared a bottle of wine, talked until 3 in the morning about medicine, life, dreams we'd abandoned. Sarah sat on the bed, processing this information. You had an affair, one night, Margaret admitted. The first time in 20 years I felt seen, valued, desired. Not as Richard Anderson's wife, but as Margaret. Just Margaret. The guilt ate me alive for weeks afterward, until I discovered Richard had been sleeping with Jessica for over a year. Does James know about the baby? He knows I'm pregnant. He doesn't know the baby might be his. The DNA test results are in my purse, but I haven't had the courage to open them yet. Sarah stood and hugged her friend carefully, mindful of the baby bump. Whatever those results say, you're the strongest woman I know, and this baby is lucky to have you. Margaret pulled back and smiled. Help me get into this dress. We have a wedding to crash. 20 minutes later, Margaret stood in front of her full-length mirror, the red dress fitting perfectly over her pregnant form. The color was bold, impossible to ignore exactly the message she wanted to send. You look like a warrior queen, Sarah said, fixing Margaret's hair into an elegant updo. A very pregnant warrior queen about to storm the castle. Sir. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Helen, who was driving up from North Carolina. 20 minutes out. That man is about to learn what Carolina women do to cheaters. Helen's almost here, Margaret announced. She drove through the night when I told her about the wedding. Your sister scares me a little, Sarah admitted. Remember when she found out about Richard's affair, I thought she was going to burn his office down. She wanted to. I had to remind her that arson is illegal, even when justified. The doorbell rang, and both women froze. Who could that be? Sarah whispered. Richard wouldn't come here today. Would he? Margaret walked carefully down the stairs, her hand on the banister for support. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar figure, Dr. James Fletcher, looking exactly as she remembered from Miami. Tall, early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and those kind blue eyes that had undone her that night. She opened the door, her heart racing. James, what are you doing here? Hello, Margaret. His British accent was warm, cultured. May I come in? We need to talk. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, protective. Who's this, honey? This is Dr. Fletcher, Margaret said carefully. From the Miami conference. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. Oh, I'll just make some tea. James stepped inside, his eyes immediately going to Margaret's belly. You look radiant. How far along? 8 months. Margaret led him to the living room, noting how out of place he looked among the artifacts of her marriage to Richard. How did you know where to find me? I've been trying to reach you for months, James said, sitting across from her. Your phone number changed. Your email bounced back. I finally tracked down your friend Sarah through the hospital directory. She told me about today, about what Richard is doing. Sarah told you. Margaret felt a flash of betrayal. Don't be angry with her. She was worried about you facing this alone, and when she mentioned you were 8 months pregnant, James paused, doing the mental math. Miami was 9 months ago. Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Is it possible, he asked gently, could the baby be mine? I had a DNA test done, Margaret said, reaching for her purse. The results are here, but I haven't opened them. I was waiting until after today. Why? Because regardless of biology, this baby is mine, and Richard needs to know that his actions have consequences, that his financial independence plan included abandoning a pregnant wife. James leaned forward. Margaret, there's something else. My specialty is toxicology. Remember Sarah mentioned Richard has been having health issues, dizzy spells, memory problems, weakness. Those are classic symptoms of slow poisoning. Margaret's blood ran cold. You think Jessica is poisoning him? From what Sarah told me about her history with dead husbands, I'd say it's highly likely. Arsenic is the most common choice, tasteless, odorless, builds up slowly in the system. By the time symptoms appear, the victim has been ingesting it for months. Sarah returned with tea, having clearly heard everything. So we're not just dealing with a gold digger, but a potential murderer. I brought a test kit, James said, pulling a small case from his jacket. If we can get a hair sample from Richard at the wedding, I can confirm it within hours. The doorbell rang again, and this time it was Helen, bursting through the door like a force of nature. Where is that lying, cheating, soon-to-be ex-husband of yours? I've got some choice words for him. Helen, Margaret said, standing to hug her sister. We're heading to the wedding soon. Helen pulled back, examining Margaret's appearance. The red dress. Good choice. That narcissistic idiot won't know what hit him. She noticed James and raised an eyebrow. And who's this tall drink of water? Dr. James Fletcher, Margaret said. He's a friend from a medical conference. Helen's eyes narrowed with sisterly intuition. Uh-huh, a friend. Well, any friend of Margaret's is welcome on this mission of justice. Margaret's phone rang, Eleanor Anderson's name appearing on the screen. Eleanor, Margaret answered, putting it on speaker. Margaret, dear. Eleanor's cultured Connecticut accent filled the room. I'm at the Rainbow Room. The guests are arriving, and that fortune hunter is in the bridal suite, counting her chickens before they hatch. Richard looks terrible pale, shaky. Whatever she's been giving him is taking its toll. We think she's poisoning him, Margaret said directly. There was a pause. I wouldn't be surprised. I had her investigated months ago. Did you know this is her third wedding to a wealthy man? The other two are dead. We know. We're coming with evidence. Good, I've already had words with the officiant. Turns out he's an old family friend who was very interested to learn that Richard is still legally married. The ceremony might not go quite as planned. After Eleanor hung up, Margaret looked around the room at her assembled support system, her best friend, her sister, and the man who might be the father of her child. Before we go, she said, I need to open these DNA results. I can't face Richard without knowing the complete truth. With shaking hands, she opened the envelope from the laboratory. Her eyes scanned the results, and she gasped. What is it? Sarah asked urgently. The baby, Margaret said slowly, is definitely not Richard's. She looked at James. She's yours. James crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hands. Margaret, I know this is complicated, but I want you to know I'm here. I've been in love with you since that night in Miami. If you'll have me, I want to be part of this child's life. Part of your life. Helen cleared her throat. As touching as this is, we have a wedding to crash and possibly a murder to prevent. Can we save the romance for after we destroy Richard's day? Margaret laughed, surprising herself. You're right, but there's more in these results. The lab also tested Jessica's baby's DNA. I had the private investigator get a sample from her trash. And Aurora, Sarah prompted. Jessica's baby isn't Richard's either. The father is Marcus Stone, Richard's business partner. Holy hell, Helen exclaimed. This is better than my soap operas. So Jessica is marrying Richard while pregnant with his business partner's baby, possibly poisoning him, all for the $1 million divorce settlement? Sarah summarized. This is insane. Margaret stood, smoothing her red dress. Then let's go make it public. Richard always said I lacked ambition, that I was content to live in his shadow. Today, he learns what happens when a woman supporting women decides to step into the light. The drive to the Rainbow Room was surreal. Margaret's Mercedes led the convoy, with Helen following in her BMW and James bringing up the rear in his rental car. Sarah sat beside Margaret, frantically texting updates to David Steinberg. David says he's already there with the documents, Sarah reported. The police detective he contacted is on standby outside. If James confirms the poisoning, they'll arrest Jessica immediately. I still can't believe Richard fell for her act, Margaret said, navigating through Manhattan traffic. He's usually so careful, so calculating. Narcissistic men always fall for women who stroke their egos. Helen's voice came through the phone on speaker. They'd connected all 3 cars on a conference call. Jessica probably told him everything he wanted to hear, that he was young, virile, deserving of a trophy wife who wasn't over 50. The midlife crisis special, Sarah added bitterly. Trade in the 50-something wife for 2 20-somethings? Except one of those 20-somethings is a serial killer, James interjected from his car. I've been researching during the drive. There was a third husband before Thomas Blake, a casino owner in Vegas who died of apparent food poisoning 5 years ago. Jessica, or rather Jennifer Murphy as she was known then, inherited 2 million. Margaret felt the baby kick strongly. She's been doing this for at least a decade then. How did she never get caught? She's smart, James replied. Changes her name, moves to a new city, waits a few years between marriages. Always makes it look accidental, but arsenic poisoning disguised as food poisoning, that's amateur work. She's gotten better since then. They pulled into the parking garage of the luxury building housing the Rainbow Room. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she turned off the engine. You okay? Honey, Sarah asked. Just nervous. Despite everything, part of me still loves the man Richard used to be. Or maybe the man I thought he was. Sarah squeezed her hand. That's what makes you human. Jessica wouldn't understand that kind of love if it hit her in her Botoxed face. They met Helen and James at the elevator. Helen was carrying a large purse that seemed unusually heavy. What's in the bag? Margaret asked suspiciously. Nothing illegal, Helen said innocently. Just my phone for recording, some pepper spray in case things get ugly, and grandmother's antique hat pin. You never know when you might need a sharp object. James checked his watch. The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. We should find Eleanor first. The elevator rose to the 65th floor, and Margaret felt each floor like a countdown to confrontation. 20 years of marriage reduced to an elevator ride. The Rainbow Room's lobby was already crowded with guests in designer clothing, champagne flutes in hand, chatting and laughing as if this were a normal wedding. Margaret recognized several faces: Richard's business associates, country club members, people who had attended their anniversary parties over the years. Margaret, a shocked voice called out. It was Jennifer Patterson, one of the country club wives. What are you doing here? Richard said you were in Europe recovering from the divorce. Did he now? Margaret said pleasantly. How interesting, considering we're still married. Jennifer's eyes widened, taking in Margaret's pregnant belly. You're pregnant, but Richard said. Richard says a lot of things. Margaret interrupted. Excuse me, I need to find my mother-in-law. They found Eleanor holding court near the windows, looking regal in navy Chanel. Several society matrons surrounded her, hanging on every word. Ah, Margaret dear, Eleanor called out loudly, ensuring everyone heard. Don't you look wonderful? Pregnancy suits you so well. Richard is so lucky to have such a devoted wife. The society women exchanged confused glances. Wife, but wasn't Richard marrying Jessica? Eleanor excused herself and pulled Margaret's group aside. Richard is in the groom's suite down the hall. He looks terrible, sweating, hands shaking. That little viper gave him more vitamins an hour ago. I need to get a hair sample, James said urgently. The longer we wait, the more damage the poison could be doing. I'll help, Eleanor said. He won't suspect his mother. Helen, you come too. We'll say we want to wish him luck. As they headed toward the groom's suite, Margaret noticed Marcus Stone near the bar, looking nervous and checking his phone repeatedly. Sarah, do you see Marcus? Margaret whispered. Oh, I see him, the father of Jessica's baby, at her wedding to his business partner. This is like a Shakespeare tragedy, except everyone's wearing Armani. Margaret approached Marcus, her red dress drawing stares from everyone she passed. Hello, Marcus. He nearly dropped his champagne. Margaret, what? What are you doing here? Supporting my husband on his big day, she said sweetly. Tell me, Marcus, how long have you been sleeping with Jessica? His face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. DNA doesn't lie. Marcus, your baby, the one Jessica's carrying, the one she's pretending is Richard's, we have the test results. Marcus grabbed her arm, not roughly but desperately. Please, you can't tell him. It would destroy the company, our partnership, everything we've built. Everything you've built on my husband's money and my sacrifices, Margaret corrected. 20 years of supporting Richard's dreams while mine died. Do you know I was one of the best OBGYNs in Manhattan? I delivered over 300 babies before I quit to be Richard's corporate wife. Margaret, please, she's poisoning him. Marcus, Your lover is slowly killing my husband for his money. Still want to protect her. Marcus staggered backward. That's impossible. Jessica loves Richard. Jessica loves money, Margaret said. Check your bank accounts. Marcus, I bet she's been siphoning funds from you too. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the groom's suite. Helen's voice rang out, "Call an ambulance, he's collapsed." Margaret rushed toward the groom's suite, her heart pounding despite everything Richard had done. The crowd parted, whispers following in her wake. Is that Margaret? Richard's wife. But he's marrying Jessica today. Inside the suite, Richard lay on an ornate sofa, his face gray and clammy. Eleanor knelt beside him, holding his wrist to check his pulse. Helen stood guard at the door, preventing curious guests from entering. What happened? Margaret asked, her medical training immediately taking over. He stood up too fast and just crumpled, Eleanor said. James got the hair sample before he collapsed. James was already on his phone with the test kit company, rushing the analysis. 15 minutes for preliminary results, he said quietly. Richard's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Margaret with confusion. Margaret, what? Why are you here? You're supposed to be in Europe. I never left. Richard, she said, checking his pupils for dilation, a sign of poisoning. And I never signed those divorce papers. He tried to sit up but fell back, weakness evident in every movement. The wedding? Jessica, there isn't going to be a wedding, Eleanor said firmly. Not when you're still married to Margaret. The door burst open, and Jessica appeared in full bridal regalia, a $10,000 Vera Wang dress that Margaret recognized from Richard's credit card statements. Her face was perfectly made up, but her eyes were wild with rage. What is she doing here? Jessica shrieked, pointing at Margaret. Security, remove this woman immediately. I'm his wife, Margaret said calmly. The only person who should be removed is you. Jessica's Valley Girl accent slipped momentarily, something harder underneath. You bitter old cow, he doesn't want you anymore. Look at you, fat, old, pathetic. He chose me. Actually, David Steinberg said, entering with a folder of documents. Mr. Chen hasn't chosen anyone, because he's still legally married. I have the records here. No divorce filing was ever submitted to the court. Richard struggled to focus. That's impossible. I filed them 6 months ago. No, you didn't, David said. You had your lawyer draw them up, but you never signed them. Perhaps you were having second thoughts. Or perhaps, Margaret said, standing to face Jessica, you were so eager to marry him before your pregnancy showed that you didn't bother to verify he was actually divorced? Jessica's perfectly composed mask cracked. You're lying, Richard. Tell them you're divorced. Richard looked confused, his hand going to his head. I can't remember. Everything's been so fuzzy lately. James's phone buzzed. He looked at the results, his face grave. Arsenic, significant levels. He's been poisoned repeatedly over at least 3 months. The room went silent except for the sound of Jessica's sharp intake of breath. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice wavered. Richard has been stressed, working too hard. The vitamins, Richard said suddenly, a moment of clarity breaking through. You've been giving me special vitamins. Said they'd help with energy. Detective Rodriguez, who David had summoned, entered the room with 2 uniformed officers. Ms. Monroe, or should I say Miss Murphy, we need you to come with us for questioning. Jessica's transformation was instant and terrifying. The Valley Girl persona vanished completely, replaced by something cold and calculating. You stupid old fool, she snarled at Richard. You were supposed to be dead by now, just like Thomas, just like William, just like all the others who thought they could own me. The confession stunned everyone, even Detective Rodriguez, who quickly read Jessica her Miranda rights as the officers moved to handcuff her. Wait, Margaret said suddenly. There's more. Jessica, would you like to tell Richard who the father of your baby really is? Or should I? Jessica's face went white under her makeup. Don't you dare, Marcus Stone, Margaret announced. Your business partner, Richard, the man you trusted with your company, has been sleeping with your fiancée. The baby she's carrying, it's his. Richard's face contorted with rage and betrayal. Marcus, Marcus. Marcus appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Richard, I can explain. You slept with Jessica. Richard's voice was weak but filled with fury. My partner, my friend. It just happened, Marcus stammered. She said you two were already broken up, that the engagement was just for show. Enough, Detective Rodriguez interrupted. Ms. Murphy, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Mr. Stone, we'll need you to come in for questioning as well. As the officers led Jessica away, she turned one last time, her voice venomous. This isn't over. I know things about your precious company, Richard, about the offshore accounts, the tax evasion, the bribed officials. If I go down, you all go down with me. Eleanor stood slowly, her patrician face showing no emotion. Then I suppose it's fortunate that I've already reported those irregularities to the FBI. My son may be a fool, but I won't let him be a criminal. Richard stared at his mother in shock. You reported me. I reported the crimes, Eleanor corrected. The FBI knows you were manipulated by Miss Murphy and Mr. Stone. You'll face fines, perhaps lose the company, but you won't go to prison. Consider it a mother's final gift, a chance to start over. The Rainbow Room had erupted into chaos. 200 of New York's elite had come for a society wedding and instead witnessed a crime scene. Phones were out, recording and photographing everything. By tomorrow, Margaret knew, this would be front-page news in every society column. The paramedics arrived and began treating Richard, preparing him for transport to Mount Sinai Hospital. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, he reached for Margaret's hand. Margaret, he whispered, the baby. Is it mine? She could have lied, could have let him suffer with uncertainty the way she had suffered for months. But looking at him pale, poisoned, betrayed by everyone he'd trusted except the wife he'd discarded, she found only pity. No, Richard, the baby isn't yours. His face crumpled. I destroyed everything, didn't I? 20 years of marriage. For what? For a woman who tried to kill me. You destroyed it long before Jessica, Margaret said quietly. The narcissistic abuse, the belittling comments, the way you made me feel invisible in my own life. Jessica was just the final act in a play you'd been writing for years. Can you ever forgive me? Margaret felt the baby kick and placed her hand protectively over her belly. Forgiveness isn't mine to give anymore. Richard, that's something you'll have to find for yourself. As the paramedics wheeled him away, Eleanor approached Margaret. You handled that with more grace than he deserved. He's still a human being, Margaret replied. A flawed, selfish human being, but human nonetheless. Helen appeared at her elbow. The guests are asking what happened. Should we make an announcement? No need, Sarah said, looking at her phone. Someone already posted a video of Jessica's confession. It's gone viral. The hashtag Wedding Crashers is trending. James stepped close to Margaret, speaking quietly. Are you all right? This must be overwhelming. I'm oddly calm, Margaret admitted. Like a weight has been lifted. For months, I've been carrying the secret of Richard's betrayal, the shame of being the discarded wife. Now everyone knows the truth. He's not the successful businessman who traded up for a younger model. He's the fool who nearly got himself killed for his midlife crisis. Margaret, Marcus Stone approached cautiously, flanked by his lawyer. I need to tell you something before the FBI freezes everything. There's a fund $5 million that Richard hid from the divorce proceedings. It's technically in both your names. The access codes are in his office safe. You deserve that money after everything. Why are you telling me this? Margaret asked suspiciously. Because Jessica played me too, Marcus said bitterly. She told me she loved me, that the baby was mine, that we'd run away together after she inherited Richard's money. I was an idiot, but you don't deserve to suffer for our stupidity. Margaret nodded. Thank you, Marcus. Good luck with the FBI. As Marcus was led away by his lawyer, the wedding guests began dispersing, the scandal providing gossip material for months to come. Margaret stood in the center of the chaos, her red dress a beacon of defiance. You know what's funny, she said to her assembled support team. 6 months ago, When I first suspected the affair, I thought my life was over. A 52-year-old pregnant woman, discarded for a younger model. It felt like the most pathetic story ever written. But look at you now, Helen said proudly. You saved Richard's life, exposed a serial killer, and reclaimed your dignity. That's not pathetic, that's heroic. I don't feel heroic, Margaret said. I just feel free. For the first time in 20 years, I'm not Richard Anderson's wife. I'm just Margaret. James stepped forward, taking her hand gently. And Margaret is more than enough. She's brilliant, brave, and about to be a wonderful mother. Margaret looked at him, this kind man who'd appeared in her life at exactly the right moment. James, we barely know each other. One night in Miami doesn't make a relationship. No, he agreed. But it could be a beginning. I'm not asking for forever. Margaret, I'm just asking for a chance to know you, to be part of this child's life. We can take it as slowly as you need. I'm going to be a single mother at 52, Margaret said. Rebuilding my medical career, dealing with the aftermath of Richard's crimes, raising a baby, it won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, James replied. But you won't be alone unless you choose to be. Eleanor approached, having supervised Richard's departure. Margaret, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with Richard, you'll always be family to me. You were the daughter I never had, and you deserve better than my son could give. Thank you, Eleanor. That means more than you know. Now, Eleanor said briskly, we need to deal with practical matters. The house in Westchester is in your name. Richard can't touch it. The prenuptial agreement you signed has a cheating clause that voids it in your favor. With Jessica's confession and the attempted murder charge, you'll receive a substantial settlement. David Steinberg nodded, consulting his phone. I've already filed emergency motions. The $1 million divorce settlement will be more like $10 million once we factor in attempted bigamy, adultery, and financial fraud. Money, Margaret said softly. 20 years ago, I thought Richard's money would make us happy. Now I know better. Financial independence after 50 isn't about the amount, it's about the freedom to choose your own path. 3 hours after the wedding disaster, Margaret found herself in a private room at Mount Sinai Hospital. Richard was stable but would need months of treatment to clear the arsenic from his system. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was in the same hospital where she'd once delivered babies, now visiting the man who'd made her give up that career. You came, Richard said weakly from his bed. I'm not here for you, Margaret said directly. I'm here to tie up loose ends. David has the divorce papers. Real ones this time. Sign them, and we can both move on. Richard looked older than his 55 years, the poison and stress taking their toll. I remember when you wore that red dress to our reception. You were so beautiful, so full of life. When did I stop seeing you? The minute you started seeing me as an accessory rather than a partner, Margaret replied. The narcissistic abuse started small little comments about my appearance, my career, my dreams. By year 10, you'd convinced me I was lucky you stayed with me. I never meant, yes, you did, Margaret interrupted. Every cutting remark, every time you introduced me as just a housewife when you knew I'd been a surgeon, every affair you thought I didn't know about before Jessica, it was all intentional. Richard, you needed to feel superior, and making me feel small was how you did it. Richard was quiet for a moment. The baby, who's the father? Someone who sees me as a person, not a possession? Margaret said simply. Sign the papers. Richard, he signed with a shaking hand. What will you do now? Live, Margaret said, taking the papers. I'm reopening my medical practice. At 52, I'm young enough to have another 20 years of delivering babies. The financial independence I'm gaining from our divorce isn't about luxury. It's about the freedom to be myself again. I'm sorry, Margaret, for everything. She paused at the door. I know you are, but sorry doesn't erase 20 years of diminishment. Goodbye. Richard. Outside the hospital room, James was waiting with Sarah and Helen. How did it go? It's done, Margaret said, holding up the signed papers. I'm officially soon to be divorced. This calls for a celebration, Helen declared. Sparkling cider for the pregnant lady, champagne for the rest of us. First, Margaret said, I need to do something I should have done months ago. She led them to the obstetrics ward, her old department. Several nurses recognized her immediately. Dr. Chen. Is it really you? One exclaimed. Soon to be Dr. Fletcher again, Margaret corrected. Fletcher was my maiden name. I'm thinking about reopening my practice. Would any of you be interested in working with me? The enthusiasm was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, she had 5 nurses expressing interest and 2 other doctors wanting to discuss partnership opportunities. This is what women supporting women really looks like, Sarah said, watching the animated discussions. Your colleagues never forgot you, honey. They've been waiting for you to come back. Dr. Patricia Williams, the current department head, appeared. Margaret, I heard about what happened today. Are you really planning to return to medicine? If you'll have me, Margaret said. I know it's been 10 years, but I've kept up with my certifications, attended conferences, even published a few papers. The paper on geriatric pregnancy was brilliant, Patricia said. Ironic, considering your current condition. When are you due? 2 weeks, Margaret said, then laughed. I'll be my own patient soon enough. We'd be honored to have you back, Patricia said warmly. Take your maternity leave, then come see me. We'll work out the details. As they left the hospital, Margaret felt lighter than she had in years. The October sun had broken through the rain clouds, casting golden light over Manhattan. You know what's remarkable, James said as they walked. This morning you thought you were crashing a wedding. Instead, you saved a life, exposed a criminal, and reclaimed your career. Don't forget the $10 million settlement, Helen added. That narcissistic ex-husband of yours is paying quite a price for his midlife crisis. It's not about revenge, Margaret said. It's about justice and new beginnings. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She read it and gasped. What is it? Sarah asked, concerned. It's from Jessica, or rather, Jennifer, from the detention center. The message was chilling. This isn't over. I have insurance, videos, recordings, documents. Your precious Richard wasn't my only target. Check your email. Margaret opened her email with trembling fingers. There was a video file attached. She clicked play, and Richard's face appeared on screen. But the conversation was with someone else, another woman, neither Jessica nor Margaret. The plan is simple, Richard was saying in the video. Margaret's life insurance is worth $20 million. Once she has the baby, we make it look like complications from childbirth. No one would suspect anything. Margaret nearly dropped her phone. The others crowded around, watching the damning video in shock. He was planning to kill you. Helen's voice was deadly. That bastard was actually planning to murder you. James took the phone, studying the video carefully. This is dated 3 months ago, before Jessica supposedly started poisoning him. Oh my God, Sarah breathed. What if Jessica wasn't the mastermind? What if she found out about Richard's plan and decided to kill him first? Margaret's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The woman in the video, I can't see her face, but that voice sounds familiar. They reached Margaret's car, and she immediately called David Steinberg. David, I need you to see something. Jessica just sent a video that changes everything. Don't do anything until I get there, David said urgently. And whatever you do, don't go home alone. If Richard was planning something, there might be others involved. James insisted on driving while Margaret sat in the back with Helen and Sarah. The 3 women huddled together as they processed this new revelation. Think about it, Helen said. Richard's been transferring $50,000 a month offshore. That's not affair money, that's hiring money. Margaret's phone rang. It was Detective Rodriguez. Mrs. Chen, where are you right now? His voice was urgent. Heading home from the hospital. Why? Don't go home. Jessica Murphy just gave a full confession in exchange for protection. Your husband hired a professional to make your death look like a childbirth complication. The woman he was talking to in that video, Dr. Monica Reeves, Margaret gasped. Monica Reeves. She's my OB-GYN. She's supposed to deliver my baby. She's been apprehended at JFK trying to board a flight to Switzerland. Mrs. Chen, we believe she's been setting up your murder for months. Every prenatal appointment, she's been documenting false complications to justify what would happen during delivery. Margaret felt the baby kick hard, as if sensing danger. Jessica knew about this. She found out 6 weeks ago. That's when she started poisoning Richard, not for money, but to stop him from killing you. In her twisted way, she was trying to save you. The car fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Take me to the police station, Margaret said firmly. I need to hear this from Jessica myself. An hour later, Margaret sat across from Jessica in an interrogation room. Detective Rodriguez and David Steinberg present. Jessica looked smaller without her designer clothes and makeup, younger, too vulnerable in a way Margaret hadn't expected. Why? Margaret asked simply. Why try to save me? Jessica laughed bitterly. You think I'm some black widow who kills for fun? My first 2 husbands were accidents. Thomas really did fall off that boat. He was drunk, showing off. William had a heart condition he never told me about. The media painted me as a killer, but I never murdered anyone. Until Richard. You were poisoning him. To save you, Jessica's voice cracked. I found the videos on his laptop. He wasn't just planning to kill you. He had a whole timeline. Make you deliver early. Bribe Monica to cause complications. Collect the insurance money. Then marry me and live happily ever after. Except I knew I'd be next. A man who kills one wife won't hesitate to kill another. Margaret studied the younger woman's face. You could have gone to the police. With what proof the videos were encrypted? I barely managed to copy one. Besides, who'd believe me? The gold digger with dead husbands in her past? Jessica shook her head. Poisoning him was the only way to stop him. If he was too sick to orchestrate your death, you'd be safe. What about Marcus, the affair? Jessica's face reddened. That was real. Maybe the only real thing in this whole mess. I fell in love with Marcus, but I couldn't leave Richard while he was planning to hurt you. I thought if I married him, I could control him, keep him sick enough that he couldn't hurt anyone. You were willing to marry a man you were poisoning to protect a woman you'd never met. You're not the first wife I've seen discarded, Jessica said quietly. My mother was left by my father for a younger woman when she turned 50. She never recovered, died broken and alone 5 years later. When I saw what Richard was planning, I couldn't let it happen again. Margaret sat back, processing this revelation. The woman she'd thought was her enemy had been trying to protect her, albeit in the most twisted way possible. The baby, Margaret said. Marcus's baby. What were you going to do? Raise it alone? Probably. Marcus is weak. He'd never leave his comfortable life for me. Just another thing I got wrong. Detective Rodriguez knocked and entered. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Monica Reeves is ready to make a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's claiming Richard threatened to destroy her career if she didn't cooperate. Let him claim whatever he wants, was Margaret said, standing. I have those divorce papers signed. Whatever happens to Richard now is his own doing. As she left the interrogation room, Jessica called out, Margaret, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. About the affair, about everything. You deserved better. Margaret turned back. We both did. 2 days after the wedding disaster, Margaret sat in her lawyer's office, surrounded by boxes of evidence. The FBI had taken over the case, uncovering a web of corruption that extended far beyond Richard's murder plot. Anderson Technologies was built on fraud, Agent Sarah Foster explained. Your husband and Marcus Stone have been running a Ponzi scheme for 5 years. The company's value is entirely fictitious. Margaret wasn't surprised. So the millionaire ex-husband is actually broke. Worse than broke, he owes millions to investors. The only real assets are the ones in your name, the house, your personal savings, and the $5 million Marcus told you about. James squeezed her hand. He'd been by her side throughout the investigation, steady and supportive without being overbearing. What happens to Richard now? Margaret asked. He's looking at 25 to life for conspiracy to commit murder, plus another 20 for fraud. Monica Reeves took a plea deal 15 years. She's testifying that Richard threatened to plant evidence of malpractice if she didn't agree to the plan. Margaret's phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. Margaret, Dear, I'm at the house. There's something you need to see. Can you come immediately? Concerned. Margaret drove to Eleanor's estate in Connecticut, James accompanying her. They found Eleanor in Richard's childhood room, surrounded by photo albums and letters. I've been going through Richard's things, Eleanor said. Her usual composure cracked. Trying to understand how my son became capable of planning murder. I found these. She handed Margaret a stack of letters, all addressed to Richard from his father, who died 10 years ago. Margaret read them with growing horror. They were filled with vitriolic messages about women, about Margaret specifically, about how Richard needed to put her in her place and show her who's boss. My late husband was a narcissistic abuser too, Eleanor admitted. I stayed for 40 years thinking I was protecting Richard. Instead, I taught him that treating women like property was normal. This doesn't excuse what he did, Margaret said gently. No, but it explains it. The cycle of abuse, passed from father to son. I'm glad you're breaking it. Eleanor looked at Margaret's belly. That little girl will grow up knowing her worth because of you. How do you know it's a girl? Margaret asked. Surprised, Eleanor smiled sadly. Richard told me months ago. He was disappointed, wanted a son to carry on the Chen name. Another reason he was willing to do what he planned. The casual cruelty of it, being willing to murder her because she was carrying a daughter, hit Margaret like a physical blow. The Chen name dies with him, Eleanor said firmly. Good riddance. But Margaret, I want you to know I've changed my will. Everything I have will go to you and the baby. It's not about money. It's about ensuring you have the resources to give that child everything Richard would have denied her. Margaret hugged the older woman, feeling the tremor in her thin shoulders. Eleanor, you don't have to. Yes, I do. It's the least I can do after failing to protect you from my son. That evening, Margaret hosted a dinner at her house. Sarah, Helen, James, and surprisingly, Marcus Stone, who'd been released on bail and wanted to make amends. I've been thinking about this whole insane situation, Sarah said, pouring wine for everyone except Margaret. In a weird way, everyone was trying to protect someone. Jessica was trying to protect Margaret. Eleanor was trying to protect Richard from himself. Even Monica claims she was protecting her career. The road to hell, Helen muttered. Good intentions mean nothing when people get hurt. Marcus cleared his throat. Margaret, I owe you an apology. I knew Richard was unhappy in your marriage, but I never imagined he'd go this far. If I'd known you were sleeping with his fiancée, Margaret interrupted. Let's not pretend you have any moral high ground here. Fair enough. Marcus looked defeated. The FBI seized everything today. The company, the accounts, all of it. Turns out Jessica was right about one thing. Richard was planning to disappear with the money after you. After everything. He had a new identity prepared. Plastic surgery scheduled in Brazil. He was going to murder me and then vanish. Margaret felt sick. The ultimate midlife transformation, James said darkly. Kill the old life literally and start fresh. Margaret stood abruptly, needing air. On the back porch, she looked up at the stars, one hand on her belly. Your father is a monster, she whispered to the baby. But you're not him. You're part of me, part of James, part of something better. James joined her, wrapping a jacket around her shoulders. How are you holding up? I should be falling apart, Margaret admitted. My husband of 20 years tried to have me killed. But instead, I feel relieved, like I finally understand that none of his cruelty was ever about me. It was always about him, his insecurity, his need for control, his narcissistic abuse. You're the strongest person I know, James said softly. Or the most naive. 20 years. James, how did I not see what he was? Because you're good, James said simply. You see the best in people. It's what makes you a great doctor. What will make you a great mother. Don't let Richard's evil change that about you. Margaret turned to face him. I barely know you. Then let's change that. I'm not asking you to love me. Margaret, just let me earn the chance to be in your life, in our daughter's life. Before she could respond, her phone rang. It was Detective Rodriguez. Mrs. Chen, Richard wants to see you. He says he'll only confess to everything if he can speak to you first. The next morning, Margaret sat across from Richard in a federal holding facility. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his usual commanding presence reduced to nothing. "You came," he said, his voice hollow. "You said you'd confess if I did. So talk." Richard looked at his hands. "I want to explain. There's no explanation for trying to murder your pregnant wife." Margaret cut him off. "But I'll listen, if only to get closure." "It started 5 years ago," Richard began. "The company was failing. Marcus had made bad investments. We were going to lose everything. So we started the Ponzi scheme. Just temporarily. Just until we could recover. And that led to planning my murder. The FBI was getting close. I knew we'd be caught eventually. I needed an exit strategy." He looked up at her. "You were supposed to be collateral damage. I told myself it would be quick, that you wouldn't suffer." "How considerate," Margaret said acidly. "I know how it sounds. But Margaret, you have to understand I was desperate. The thought of losing everything, of being nobody again, it drove me insane." "You were never nobody, Richard. You were a husband, potentially a father, but that wasn't enough for you." "No," he admitted. "It wasn't. I needed to be important, powerful, admired. The narcissistic abuse my father heaped on me, I swore I'd never be weak like he said I was. Instead, I became him." "You became worse than him. Your father never tried to murder your mother." Richard flinched. "When did you stop loving me?" "Margaret, when you stopped seeing me as a person, probably around year 10, when you told that investor I was just a housewife after I'd spent all night helping you prepare your presentation." "I'm sorry." "No, you're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." Richard was quiet for a moment. "The baby. James Fletcher's, yes. He's a good man. Better than I ever was. Yes, he is." "I'll confess to everything," Richard said finally. "The murder plot, the fraud, all of it, on one condition." Margaret tensed. "What condition?" "Let my mother stay in your life, in the baby's life. She's the only good thing left of the Chen family. Eleanor was already going to be part of our lives. She's family to me. Richard, the family you never were." Richard nodded, tears finally flowing. "I destroyed everything. Didn't I? 20 years of marriage, a successful company, a child on the way. I threw it all away for what? For the illusion of being someone important. You threw it away because you're a narcissist who can't see beyond himself," Margaret said, standing. "This is goodbye, Richard. I hope you find some peace in prison, but I won't be part of your redemption story." As she walked to the door, Richard called out, "Margaret, for what it's worth, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. I just wasn't smart enough to see it." "No," Margaret said without turning around. "You saw it. You just didn't value it." Outside the facility, James was waiting with Helen and Sarah. They'd insisted on coming for support. "How did it go?" Sarah asked anxiously. "He'll confess. It's over." Helen hugged her sister fiercely. "You did it, Margaret. You faced him down and won." "I don't feel like I won," Margaret said. 20 years of my life wasted on a man who was planning to kill me." "Not wasted," James said gently. "Those years made you who you are, strong, compassionate, resilient. The woman I fell in love with in Miami wasn't broken by Richard. She was forged by surviving him." That afternoon, they attended a gathering Eleanor had organized, a divorce shower, she called it, complete with cake and champagne. "To new beginnings," Eleanor toasted. "To Margaret, who showed more grace under pressure than anyone I've known. To the baby girl who will grow up knowing she is valued and loved. And to the future, which looks brighter without Richard in it." The party was filled with women supporting women colleagues from the hospital, friends from the community, even some society wives who'd quietly endured their own narcissistic abuse and saw Margaret as a hero. Dr. Patricia Williams pulled Margaret aside. "Your position at the hospital is confirmed. Start whenever you're ready after maternity leave. Full partnership track, your own practice within the department. Financial independence after 50, Margaret murmured. "I never thought I'd be starting over at this age." 52 is the new 30, Patricia laughed. "Besides, you're not starting over. You're picking up where you left off, with 20 years more wisdom." As the party wound down, Margaret felt the first contraction. Subtle, but unmistakable. "James," she said quietly, "I think it's time." 14 hours later, Margaret held her daughter for the first time. The delivery had been smooth. Patricia had personally overseen everything and ensuring no complications after the Monica Reeves conspiracy. "She's perfect," James whispered, his finger caught in the baby's tiny grip. "What should we call her?" "Hope," Margaret said without hesitation. "Because that's what she represents. Hope for the future, hope for second chances, hope that even after the darkest betrayal, life can begin again." Sarah and Helen crowded into the room, followed by Eleanor carrying an enormous bouquet of pink roses. "Let me see my granddaughter," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her usually composed face. "Oh, Margaret, she's beautiful." "Granddaughter?" Margaret asked. "If you'll let me claim her," Eleanor said hopefully. "Blood doesn't make family, love does, and I already love this little girl more than I thought possible." "Of course you're her grandmother," Margaret said warmly. "Hope needs all the love she can get." Over the next days, the news cycle exploded with the story. "Millionaire's murder plot exposed by pregnant wife," headlined the New York Times. "The ultimate betrayal, CEO planned pregnant wife's death," screamed the Post. Margaret declined all interview requests, focusing instead on her daughter and recovery. A week after Hope's birth, Detective Rodriguez visited with final updates. Richard Anderson pled guilty to all charges. Life without parole. Monica Reeves got 20 years. Marcus Stone took a plea deal, 10 years, and full cooperation with the FBI. Jessica Murphy got 5 years for the poisoning. But with time served and good behavior, she'll be out in 3. "What will happen to her?" Margaret asked, adjusting Hope's blanket. "She's planning to write a book about the experience. Already has a publisher interested. Says she wants to donate the proceeds to a women's shelter." Margaret shook her head at the irony. Everyone was trying to profit from the story except her. 3 months later, Margaret stood in her new office at Mount Sinai, Hope sleeping peacefully in a bassinet nearby. The practice was thriving. Women specifically sought her out, inspired by her story of survival and transformation. "Your 11 o'clock is here," her nurse announced. To Margaret's surprise, Jessica Murphy walked in, visibly pregnant. "Hello, Margaret," Jessica said nervously. "I know this is awkward, but I need a good OBGYN, and you're the best." Margaret studied the younger woman. Prison had changed her. Gone was the polished gold digger, replaced by someone who looked genuine for the first time. "Marcus's baby?" Margaret asked. Jessica nodded. "He's in minimum security. We write. Maybe when he gets out, but probably not. I'm planning to raise this child alone." "Why come to me?" "Because you're the only person who saw through everyone's lies, including mine. I trust you to deliver this baby safely." Jessica paused. "And maybe because I owe you. I nearly destroyed your life with my affair with Richard." "Richard destroyed his own life," Margaret said. "Sit down. Let's check on your baby." As she examined Jessica, Margaret reflected on the strange turns life takes. 6 months ago, she'd thought this woman was her enemy. Now she was her patient. Another woman starting over after 50. Jessica was 32, but seemed older, worn down by her experiences. "The baby's healthy," Margaret told her. "Due in about 4 months. Any questions?" "Just one," Jessica said. "How do you do it? Move forward after everything?" Margaret looked at Hope, now stirring in her bassinet. "You choose to. Every day, you choose to be more than what happened to you. My midlife transformation wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about reclaiming myself." That evening, Margaret hosted dinner at her new apartment, smaller than the house, but entirely hers. James had officially moved in the week before, their relationship having grown steady and strong over the months. "A toast," Sarah proposed, raising her glass. "To Margaret, who showed us all that 50-something women are forces of nature. To Hope, who will grow up knowing her worth. And to second chances. To women supporting women," Helen added. "And to narcissistic ex-husbands getting exactly what they deserve." Eleanor, now a permanent fixture in their lives, smiled. "To families of choice, not just blood." James stood, pulling out a small box. "And to futures we never expected." Margaret gasped as he knelt beside her chair. Margaret Fletcher, he said, his British accent warm with emotion. You've shown me that love isn't about age or timing or conventional paths. It's about choosing someone every day, seeing them fully, and believing in the life you can build together. Will you marry me? Margaret looked around the table, her sister, her best friend, her chosen mother, her daughter, and this good man offering her a love she'd never thought possible. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. Yes to love after 50. Yes to new beginnings. Yes to believing I deserve happiness. As James slipped the ring on her finger, a simple sapphire, nothing like the ostentatious diamond Richard had given her, Hope gurgled happily in her high chair. You know what the funny thing is, Margaret said, looking at her assembled family. Richard did do me one favor. By trying to destroy me, he freed me to find who I really was all along. A survivor? Sarah asked. No, Margaret said, bouncing Hope on her lap. Just a woman who finally chose herself. And that's enough. That's more than enough. 1 year later, Margaret stood in her thriving practice, now expanded to include 2 partner physicians. The wall displayed her degrees, certifications, and a framed newspaper clipping, Doctor Rebuilds Life After Exposing Husband's Murder Plot. But the most important frame held a photo from her wedding to James, a small ceremony on the beach in Miami, where they'd first met. Hope, now walking, had been the flower girl, toddling down the sand-strewn aisle with Eleanor's careful guidance. Dr. Fletcher. Her nurse knocked. Your 2 o'clock is here. She says she's writing an article about midlife transformation and financial independence after 50. Margaret smiled. These interviews had become routine women wanting to know how she'd survived, rebuilt, thrived. The journalist was younger, maybe 35, with eager eyes and a nervous energy. Dr. Fletcher, your story has inspired millions of women. The millionaire ex-husband who tried to kill you is in prison. You've rebuilt your medical career, remarried, and you're raising a daughter at 53. How did you do it? Margaret considered the question, one she'd been asked hundreds of times. I stopped believing the lie that my value decreased with age. Society tells women we become invisible after 50, that we should be grateful for whatever attention we get, even if it's from a narcissistic abuser. But the truth is, we become more powerful with age. We know ourselves. We've survived enough to fear less, and we've learned that our worth isn't determined by anyone else. What about the financial aspect? Your divorce settlement was substantial. $10 million, Margaret said frankly. But you know what I've made more than that in the past year through my practice? The money from Richard was justice, but my financial independence comes from my own work. That's the real power, knowing I can support myself and my daughter without depending on anyone. Any advice for women in similar situations? Margaret looked at the photo of Hope on her desk. Trust yourself. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone, husband, society, or your own fears convince you that you don't deserve better. And remember, it's never too late to start over. I thought my life was ending at 52. Turns out, it was just beginning. The interview concluded, and Margaret walked the journalist out, passing the waiting room full of patients, women who'd chosen her not despite her story, but because of it. Mama, Hope's voice called out. James had brought her for lunch, as he did every Wednesday. Margaret scooped up her daughter, kissing James hello. How's my brilliant girl? She's been asking about babies all morning, James laughed. I think she wants a sibling, Margaret, now 53, smiled. Well, I am an expert in geriatric pregnancies. You're serious? James's eyes lit up. Why not? If this journey has taught me anything, it's that conventional timelines are meaningless. We write our own stories. That evening, the family gathered for Hope's second birthday. Eleanor had insisted on hosting at her estate, transforming the gardens into a fairyland of pink and gold. Sarah pulled Margaret aside during the party. Honey, you've come so far from that morning in the coffee shop when you were planning to crash Richard's wedding. That was the beginning of everything, Margaret reflected. The moment I decided to stop being a supporting character in my own life. Helen joined them, champagne in hand. Speaking of Richard, did you hear he's apparently found religion in prison? Wants to apologize to everyone he hurt. Good for him, Margaret said neutrally. But his redemption story doesn't include me. I've written my own ending. Eleanor appeared with Hope on her hip. This little one wants her mama to tell the story about the red dress. Margaret laughed, taking her daughter. It had become Hope's favorite bedtime story, age-appropriately edited. Of course. Once upon a time, Margaret began, there was a woman who thought she was invisible, but she put on a red dress and discovered she'd been powerful all along. And she saved everyone. Hope added, clapping her hands. No, sweetheart, Margaret corrected gently. She saved herself, and that was enough. As the sun set over the garden, Margaret looked around at her chosen family women, supporting women. A good man who saw her as an equal, a daughter who would grow up knowing her worth, and a mother-in-law who'd become a true mother. Richard had taken 20 years of her life, but he'd failed to take her future. The midlife transformation she'd undergone wasn't about becoming someone new, it was about finally becoming herself. You know what, Margaret said to James as they watched Hope play with the other children. Jessica was wrong about one thing. This isn't a story about a bitter old woman getting revenge. It's about a woman discovering that the best years of her life were waiting for her after 50. James kissed her temple. The best years are still ahead. Margaret smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach where, unknown to everyone but her doctor, a new life was already growing. Another child at 53, unconventional, perhaps even scandalous to some. But then again, she'd never been one for convention. The Margaret who'd sat in that coffee shop, 8 months pregnant and planning to crash her husband's wedding, would never have imagined this ending. But that was the beauty of survival, of transformation, of choosing yourself. You never knew what joy was waiting on the other side of betrayal. As the party continued around her, Margaret made a mental note to call her publisher tomorrow. She'd been resisting writing a book about her experience, but maybe it was time. Not for fame or profit, but for all the women who needed to know that it's never too late to choose yourself, to achieve financial independence after 50, to leave a narcissistic ex-husband, to survive a $1 million divorce settlement and come out stronger. Her story wasn't unique because of the murder plot or the dramatic wedding crash. It was powerful because it was, at its core, the story of every woman who'd ever been told she was too old, too late, too much, or not enough. And if Margaret Anderson Fletcher, doctor, mother, survivor, could prove anything, it was that those voices were wrong, dead wrong. The red dress still hung in her closet, a reminder of the day she'd stopped being invisible. But she didn't need it anymore. She was visible in every choice she made, every patient she helped, every time she looked in the mirror and saw not a discarded 50-something wife, but a woman in her prime. Richard was serving life in prison. Monica Reeves was behind bars. Marcus Stone was paying for his crimes. Jessica Murphy was rebuilding her life with her own child. And Margaret was free. Free to love. Free to work. Free to raise her daughter with the knowledge that a woman's worth is intrinsic, unchangeable, and certainly not determined by any man, millionaire, ex-husband, or otherwise. As the stars came out over Eleanor's garden, Hope fell asleep in Margaret's arms, James's hand warm on her back, their family surrounding them with love and laughter. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge, not even justice, but a life fully lived, authentically chosen, and fearlessly embraced. Margaret Anderson had thought her story was ending. Instead, she'd discovered it was just beginning. And what a beginning it was.